So if you haven't noticed, everything is changing and moving really quickly, and we are in the early stages of this new age called the Age of Aquarius. And in this new age, religion and spirituality looks a lot different than what it used to look like in the old age of Pisces. And that's just the reality of it. The age that we are coming out of, the old age, had a lot to do with like hive mind mentality. Oh, we believe this because we were born into a system, a tradition where everyone just thinks like this and talks the same way and goes to the same place on Sunday and just goes through the rituals, and like that's our spirituality. And we don't really know why we believe what we believe. We just accept it, and we read this book and this is what it says, and that's it. And what we're noticing is there's like this mass exodus of people leaving that old way of like religion or spirituality because it's not working for them. And they're realizing that there's something so much more to their being than what is being told about their being or who they are. In other words, they're recognizing that there's like this inherent liberation, this spark of divinity, if you want to call it that, within themselves that is like yearning for something different, something bigger, something more expansive, something more inclusive. And it's like, I feel like for so many of us, it comes down to this point of deciding whether or not we're going to listen to that inner cry or just remain asleep and follow the leader and stay in line. Like that's what it amounts to. It's that decision. Like, do we just continue to go with this old way, this old system, this old tradition because we were born into it, because everyone else in our family thinks like this and believes like this, or our friends or our community or whatever? Or are we going to step out of line and go our own way, go our own path? And what's crazy is it's like when you're in a system that is very much like a fundamentalist system where there are certain creeds and doctrines and beliefs that you have to adhere to in order to be included, in order to be in the in-group, in order to be saved, in order to be, whatever, fill in the blank. But it's like when you're in a system like that, the teaching or what's said is this is the way it is, this is the one and only way. And if you disagree with us, if you start to question our authority, if you start to question our interpretation of this particular holy book or whatever, it's like if you start to go against the system, then there's something wrong with you. You're deceived by the devil. You're going to be lost. You're going to be confused, and your life is going to be horrible. And I was literally told that. I was literally led to believe. And that's why, like, for so many years, while I was starting to like think differently and while I was starting to have like these inner impressions of like thinking differently and seeing things from a different perspective and like wanting to challenge some of the mainstream beliefs, like the reason I kept my mouth shut was because I was afraid. Like I literally had so much subconscious fear and anxiety about like what would happen if I did start to walk my own path and like break away from the group, from the system. And again, the fear that I was experiencing was the fear that was instilled into me from the leaders of this system, because that's what control and manipulation is essentially all about. That's how you control a group of people. It's through fear. And basically what you say is if you don't do what we're telling you, if you go against the system, if you go against our rules or commandments, then something bad is going to happen. You're going to lose God's favor, or God's going to hand you over to the devil, or something bad will happen to you. And so there's all these things. It's scare tactics. And that's what's used to keep people in line. So for me, it was like, it was tough, but I got to a place where, like I was saying, I had to make a choice. I had to make a decision on whether or not I was going to trust my intuition and this inner light within me that was crying out, that was screaming to like break away from this matrix and go in another direction, or was I going to just be quiet and trust that my leaders and these people around me had it all figured out, and I would just continue to do what they say. And I decided, after years of wrestling with this, I decided that this was it. Enough is enough. I'm breaking free. And at first it was terrifying because I still had all of this subconscious programming of fear about what would happen, and what about hell, and what about, God not blessing me or whatever, because I am not a part of this particular system, and this was the one and only system, and all these things, like all these what ifs. But eventually what happened was, when I started meditating, actually, I started to notice that all these different things that I was believing in were just things. They were just thoughts. They were just ideas. They were concepts that were invented by humans and from the egoic consciousness. So it was like, well, wait a second. Like, why have I been believing in all these things? And then I realized it was like, wow, like, the majority of these things that I had believed in and viewed as absolutely true, non-negotiable, like all of these things were just things I had just accepted without question. And this is what started this path of me like, okay, I'm going to start questioning everything, and I'm going to start doing my own research and studying for myself and coming to my own views independently. And when I did that, it was amazing, because this is when I started this path of mysticism, of meditation, of going within and directly experiencing the divine within me. But what I learned was that, like, I think at first I had this mindset of, okay, yes, this is awesome because they didn't teach me this in my old religious tradition. This whole notion that like God is within you and anyone can experience the divine within because the divine is within all beings. Like, that wasn't taught in the old fundamentalist system I was a part of. It was taught that like only certain people, only believers, only those who where true Christians had the Spirit of God within them. But now in this new world of mysticism that I was getting into, the good news, the positive theology here was that God is infinite, God is ever present, and we are all living and moving and having our being in God's being, which is something that Paul talks about actually in Acts 17, I believe, and he's quoting one of the Greek poets there. But anyway, so it was like this new, like, inclusive, expansive view of the divine, where I was starting to view God not as a being, but being itself, like I had just said. And it was this universal, unconditional reality of love and presence, and that was incredible. And so meditation helped me to experience that. And that's when I realized, like, I don't need a religion. I don't need a holy book. I don't need a church or a pastor or a priest or a guru to experience this divinity. However, that became something that I think for myself, I was starting to realize how this can become just another theological concept if I'm not actually having the direct experience and then allowing that to like flourish and express in my life. You know what I mean? So like even the whole notion of God is within you can become another dogma to a degree until it becomes a direct experience and until it starts to like flow out of your life and add value to the lives of those around you, because that's essentially what the divine is all about. It's about transcending the illusion of the ego, the separate self, so that this reality of love and wholeness can emanate from your being and reveal and show other beings the truth of oneness. And then we can live from this heightened state of awareness, this unity consciousness, and that's essentially what walking in unconditional love, non-judgment is all about. So, but what I noticed for me was that when this started to shift from a theological concept to a direct life-changing experience, what I noticed was that the best way for me to actually experience the divine was, of course, by first and foremost going within. That's the pattern, that's the sequence. You go within first, you experience the divine within yourself, and then when that happens, it opens up the the doors of your heart, so to speak, and you can start to sense or see the divine in everyone and everything. But it starts by going within. But for me, what I noticed was that, like, my greatest path or my greatest ability to experience my true self, my divinity, was through my authenticity, which was something I had been taught to like ignore. And, I was taught that who I really am at the core is sinful and separated from God and wicked and all these horrible things, right? So I was conditioned to only trust external authorities, never to trust my own inner intuitive guidance or anything like that. But now that I am like broken away from this old system, and I'm in this new like awareness of going within and experiencing the divine for myself, from this place, I started to realize that authenticity is not a bad thing. Authenticity is not a sinful thing. Authenticity is actually, like I'm saying, how we individually experience the divine within ourselves the best. And then what happens is when we just start to be our true selves, when we start to live from that authentic place, then in a very natural and effortless way, the divine starts to just flow through our lives in ways that we could never imagine. And it's so simple. The mind will try to complicate it because the mind will think, oh, this is something I have to do. This is some kind of like status, some kind of super spiritual status. And it's like, no, this is just who you are. Because who you are is not stagnant. Who you are is a river. It's flowing. It's moving. That's what the divine mystery is all about. And when you surrender to that flow and let it do its thing, then like it's amazing. It's infinite potentiality, So yeah, this is when the spiritual journey, I think, really starts. And this new age of Aquarius that we're in is actually all about this. It's not like the old age of Pisces where, in Pisces, like the religion and these different structures, it was all about external religious authority and like adhering to these different creeds and doctrines. And it was kind of based on this whole notion of separation. So God is some kind of distant deity and we have to have some mediator. And if we do all these things correctly, then we can experience the presence of God. But it's all really conditional. But the difference between the age of Pisces and this new age of Aquarius that we're in is that we're going from a system that was conditional to this new realm, this new reality of unconditional love. And this unconditional love is not something external. It's something that we fundamentally are. So in the age of Aquarius, it's not about being a part of some like system and believing like everyone else around you and following the leader and staying in line. No, it's about your own inner experience and your own path unfolding. And I want to read a quote from Rumi because this is in my opinion, this is one of Rumi's best quotes. And I just feel like it sums up what I'm trying to convey here in a really nice way. So he says, "Don't be satisfied with stories, how things have gone with others. Unfold your own myth." So in this new age of Aquarius, where we're discovering our own inner divinity and then we're living authentically, it's like you have to understand that your path in life is going to look different than everyone else's. It's going to be completely different. It's going to be unique. And that's what makes it so beautiful. That's what makes it so profound. You're not like everyone else. You are a unique expression of the one. You are a fractal of source consciousness. And so this is where it gets awesome, because when you understand this, then like the guilt, the shame, the condemnation of not being a part of some kind of religion or not being a part of some kind of like spiritual movement or group, whatever it is, that starts to lift from you because you realize you don't need that. You never needed that. And the reason you incarnated when you did was to be a forerunner in this new age to show the rest of humanity that the way forward, the way consciousness is evolving at this point, is through the individual path, through inner divinity, through authenticity. So, yeah, this is where it gets interesting, because it's like we end up experiencing all these things in our lives, and it's so easy for us. Like, even sometimes, even after you break away from like the old religious systems, you break out of some like hive mind community, some kind of like system of group narcissism, and you get into like, maybe a spiritual path, maybe you start meditating, maybe you start realizing that the divine is within you and within everyone and everything, and it's liberating and it's awesome and it's great. But there can be like this tendency, especially if you came from like some kind of fundamentalist system that was all about proselytism, there can be this tendency to like want to convert everyone you meet and like your family members and your friends to your new philosophy, to your new like spiritual view of the world and everything. But again, that's not what I think we are supposed to be doing in this new age. I think that it's not about trying to convert people to our views and our ways and our beliefs. I think it's more about encouraging people, encouraging individuals to go within and to discover who they really are for themselves, and then to unlock their own inner divinity and authenticity, and to flow from there, and to like trust that it's going to look different for that person than it looks for you, and that's totally okay. Like, it's okay for someone to experience the divine in a way that looks different than the way you experience the divine. And when you can get to this place of like being okay with that and trusting that, it's liberating, because it's like, I don't have to change anyone's minds about God, about religion, about the afterlife, because they've chosen to experience, they've chosen to incarnate, they have chosen to like have the path that is unfolding for them. And this is part of their soul's evolution. This is part of their soul's journey. And I'm going to trust that me simply encouraging them to trust their own intuitive heart. And I'm talking, when I say intuitive heart, I mean like beyond the ego. I'm not talking about some kind of like egoic, path, or some kind of egoic motive that is only glorifying and pedestalizing the small self, the egoic self. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about heart-based, heart-centered spirituality, where there is this direct experience of the true self. And by true self here, I mean capital T, capital S, of infinite awareness. And then after that experience happens, the infinite awareness is then like able to live through the ego, but it's not attached to the ego. So the true self is living through the false self, the small self, the ego, but there is no longer identification or attachment to the small self, to the ego. That's what I'm talking about. And that's where authenticity can actually start to be expressed. Authenticity is not the true self, capital T, capital S. The true self, capital T, capital S, is pure infinite consciousness. It's pure oneness. Okay. But where we're getting authenticity from is when the one consciousness is channeled, is localized, or at least it appears to be channeled or localized through some kind of egoic structure. But the egoic structure is not the main thing. That's the difference. The egoic structure is not the identity. It's just the wave from which the divine is uniquely expressing itself. So you see, a lot of people think the ego is a bad thing. And sometimes maybe, I don't know, maybe when I'm talking about it, when I'm teaching about it, maybe I don't do that great of a job of really explaining what it is and what it's not. And maybe sometimes when I'm talking about it, I can kind of like give it a negative connotation. So if I've done that, and if you've interpreted me saying it that way, then I apologize for not explaining it in a better way. But the ego is neutral, okay? The ego is simply our sense of like, it's this false sense of self. It's like this sense of separateness that we're experiencing in this human experience. But the ego is essential for the human experience. The ego, like I said, is how we channel and express our uniqueness. But where it can become unhealthy or toxic is when we think that all we are is the ego. And before awakening, that is how we're living. That is what we're programmed to believe, that all we are is this separate, small, finite self. And so the belief, the attachment, the identity with the ego is what creates all these problems. But when you transcend the ego and realize who you really are, the I am presence, the infinite awareness, then you're able to come back down from the mountain, so to speak, and live through your incarnation or live through your ego in a way where you integrate the ego. So you transcend and you include. That's the healthy path of spiritual evolution. So this happens. And now all of a sudden, like I said, you're able to be this very unique, beautiful expression of the one. And yeah, with this is going to come your own myth. So think about it like this too, like in the old age and the ages before that, like ancient mythology had a lot to do with how these different religions were formed. In fact, just about every religion that has been formed, the stories in these different religions were influenced from ancient mythology, okay? And it's once you like study and understand mythology, you can't it's all over these stories. It's all over the different religious traditions, so you can't not see it. But anyway, we have these mythologies and these ancient stories and these archetypes, and Carl Jung talked a lot about the collective unconscious and how this creates these different myths and archetypes and that we find throughout all these different stories throughout time, which is incredible. I love studying and reading Carl Jung's work and Joseph Campbell's work. But what's really interesting about this age that we're in now is that what we're starting to see is that all these different myths, all these different stories, and even stuff with astrology, it's all about the individual experience. It's all about your unique path unfolding. All the myths are pointing to your human experience. And this is when it becomes very personal and very practical and very transformative. So, there's these different themes, right? Like in the different myths about death and rebirth and the hero's journey, like overcoming obstacles, and like all these things that we find in nature, these connections. This is what really some of the oldest myths were made from. But what we start to realize is that these different themes, these different archetypes are unfolding in our own personal myths, in our own personal journeys. And it just makes so much sense. And then we can look to these different myths as guidance if we want to see that, hey, you know what? Okay, we're living in a world of duality. So we go through valleys, but then there's the mountain, and then you're on top of the mountain, but then there's another valley. And it's just this crazy, messy, beautiful, unpredictable, complicated world of duality that we're trying to navigate. But ultimately, the greater takeaway is that the myth, the journey that each and every one of us is experiencing is for the soul's purpose, or it's let me say it like this. It's for the soul's evolution. That's the simple way of saying it. I was trying to come up with something fancy to say, but that's the simplest way to say it. It's for the soul's evolution. It's a curriculum, and it's a beautiful story. So that's why, why do you think we love movies and certain novels that have these incredible stories and plots to them? Because the reason we love them so much, the reason we're so drawn to them and entertained by these different movies and stories is because something about the hero's journey or whatever it is about us. It relates to us. It connects to us and things that we're experiencing in our own lives and things we're having to overcome. But ultimately, it's for each and every one of us, like I was saying from the very beginning of this video, what it boils down to is, okay, this is your story, this is your path, and the question is, this is the movie, okay? This is the myth. Are you going to go with the system? Are you going to swim like with all the other fish, or are you going to like make a shift and start swimming upstream? Are you going to break out of the patterns, transcend the matrix, and follow your own intuitive heart? Because once you start to follow your own intuitive heart, this is when the hero in you, this is when the Christ in you, the Buddha in you, starts to awaken. And this is when your life is transformed, and then you become the light of the world. You become the Christ. You become the Buddha. You become all these things that you thought were like separate from you and distant from you. You realize that everything is one. You realize that this is your journey, your story, your path, and it's up to you to allow that light to shine beyond your egoic identity and egoic structure so that you can transform the world around you. Because again, a big part of this path of going the individual route and not adhering to any particular religion or system or whatever is understanding that it's first and foremost about the ego transcendence. And if it's about ego transcendence, then that means that whatever your story, whatever your myth is going to reveal and express is going to be something, it's going to be something that is way beyond yourself. It's going to be something that ends up adding value to the lives of those around you, and it's going to be a beautiful embodiment of the unconditional love that you fundamentally are through a very unique expression of your authentic self. But that's what makes it so amazing. Like the hero's journey is about the hero saving the day. The hero is bringing some kind of light in a unique way to the world. And from that, there's restoration, there's healing, there's this revelation of wholeness. And this is just like one piece of the puzzle of this ultimate shift of the collective consciousness, waking up to the truth of the true self and living from love instead of from judgment, and living from peace instead of from division, and living from joy instead of from hatred. So like this, like your journey, your life, is extremely meaningful. It's extremely important because your authentic self is exactly what the world needs in order for the world to experience this, like I said, this ultimate collective shift that's happening. So be encouraged by that. Be inspired by that. And if anything, take Rumi's words, take my words, but really take the words to heart. Sit with them, meditate on them, and realize that you've got a journey ahead of you and you signed up for it. I believe this is something that you chose before you incarnated, and it's your myth, so let it unfold. But realize that it's going to look different. It's going to be something that the world has never seen, and that's why it needs to be expressed. It needs to be heard. It needs to be revealed. So stop hiding your light. Let it shine. Be who you really are, unapologetically, and watch the transformation that just starts to happen everywhere you go. Because it can't not happen. Yeah, it can't not happen if you're walking in your authentic light and you're being who you really are. Because the magnetism, the vibrational frequency is out of this world when you are living authentically. So I think that's it for today. If you found this video helpful, informative, or insightful, please leave a thumbs up at the bottom of the screen and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.